worthwhile, because it tends to be quite useful. I did have to check the attendee list. Sometimes you don't get one. There's no one that can say anything rude about on there, so you're fine. Morning. So thank you for having me. This is the second one that he's done. I did the one back in the one before last. So nice to be back. I don't know how many people were there last time. It was a similar kind of subject I was speaking on, to that was specifically social media and how social media affects your bottom line. This is kind of a progression of that. So that's what I was asked to talk about. When I was first doing this, I met up with Tim in a cafe and we started plotting this out. So it's usually good to give your audience an overview of what you're going to cover over the next little while. So there you go. That's what we came out with. You may want to switch off now if that will make sense to you. So now we'll go down to a bunch of sort of sub-questions that came off the back of this. First one, how good are supportable metrics in terms of expenditure on digital marketing? Short version, not very. I could go on about that for ages. What I'd like to do is be slightly less tactical and more kind of strategic in the kind of view that we're taking. We can totally get into some of the more granular stuff later on. It's useful, but I think some of the other speakers are going to do a better job of that than I am. My take on this is, like, this is my favourite. I seem to be going for landscape photos at the moment. I think this is because I work out my spare room and I get cabin fever, so I like these kinds of things. So in terms of so answering this question, how good are the metrics to judge your returns? It's kind of, so it's like a cloudy mountain. You can make out that there was a mountain and a forest on there or something, but it's foggy and there's unknown areas and there might be bears out there that you wouldn't encounter. So, there you go. Is income the only sound metric? I wish, like I really do wish. I do a lot of digital analytics. I went to a conference a couple of months ago called Measure Camp. So that's how I spend my Saturdays. And that was loads of people who work for Tesco's and like Burton and Chelsea and people like that, who their primary interest is the bottom line, and everything's got a pound sign after it on that line. So they can make sense of that. I went along, I did 6 months at the beginning of this year filling in as Tate's digital analyst, so filling out all sorts of reports and doing all sorts of mostly website data crunching for them. And if only everything came down to income, but this is the arts, everything doesn't come down to that. This is my favourite quote. I did this time last year. In fact, this slide came from that, so sorry if this is a repeat for you. I used this last time as well, because I think Andrew, who's the lead developer at VNA, we developed a dashboard for their trustees, and his point was, we're not a shop. Like, the money goes towards funding the stuff that we do and the mission and the points of this organisation. If everything was boiled down to income, then that would fundamentally change what we're about as an organisation. They've got a situation where the guy who had their board went to the VNA when he was about 10 or something. He went to the castle courts and had a life-altering experience and fell in love with the place, and years later became the chair of their board. And so whenever they're looking at trying to judge the impact of what they do, they're like, how do we measure that? Like, we don't do that in Google Analytics. Sorry, I wish. But it's totally true. It's not just about income. So if we're talking about supportable metrics, return on digital spend, all this kind of stuff applies as well. It's the intangibles. And a lot of this is woolly and hard to define, and no one's nailed this. So all you can really do in work there is just kind of chip away at it and try and identify some of these things. And this is why data-driven marketing or in operations, things like that, is never going to tell you the whole story and why things need to be data informed to some extent, I guess, and why there is room for intuition and just knowing that the project that you ran led to an increase in your reputation or vice versa. So all that stuff needs to be borne in mind as well, just because it didn't shift tickets. Maybe you reach that 10-year-old and change their life, and that's what you're existing for. So this is stuff that keeps me up at night, frankly. Just in terms of, this is a slide from a McKinsey report about big data. Big data was huge last year, we don't seem to get so much these days. But this is all about different industries and how much of an impact big data, I won't go into what big data is, but big numbers, could have on different types of organisations, and it's split by ease of capturing the pertinent information and the potential value that doing stuff with this data might give you. The size of the bubble is relative contribution to GDP. These are American stats. Just to point out, so things like finance and insurance, big part of GDP, huge potential value, dead easy to capture the information. This is why all the banks are hiring all the computer science graduates. Oh, bless them. That's arts and entertainment. It is freaking hard to capture all the data that is pertinent to what an arts organisation does. It's really hard. Plus, the value's somewhere around there, but it's quite small. Bear in mind, arts and entertainment includes, certainly includes Hollywood and music, and may include gaming. I was having a hard time trying to put that out. The performing arts and visual arts and museums, if you think what a tiny percentage that would be. So this is kind of the problem. It's really hard to capture the information. Actually, what you do with information may not be all that hot anyway. You're feeling enthusiastic. Sorry. It's a really good slide coming later. This was the episode that we got broken down to. How can we assess whether spending more or less improves operating margins? And this is the kind of point where I wanted to take a step back and say, hang about spending on what? Like I said, when this was first captured mostly in terms of digital marketing, but I think that if you look at a lot of cultural organisations, the digital marketing is a part of it, but there are other parts that make up their digital activity, and there's a lot of overlap between all these things as well. So as if trying to define metrics for intangible benefits wasn't hard enough, this was the next thing that I've been thinking about lately. And so obviously you lean on what other people are doing. There's a guy called Owen Pringle who spoke at I think it's an AMA conference. No, Let's Get Real. Spoke at that fairly recently. This was one of his slides. He's trying to explain. I'll send these around later, so I don't understand too much. It's tricky. But his basic point is that in the process of doing stuff, there are all sorts of stages. So R&D at the beginning, logistics, distribution, getting stuff to the customer, engagement, income generation, and kind of after sales support stuff. And his point is that most of the digital business operations come in this bit, the engagement, which is like comms, I guess, and income generation, taking money online. The rest, not so much, and there's opportunity here to go into there and digitise them. So that's one go. I thought that's sort of right, but wasn't quite ticking all my boxes. There's a guy called James Cowdery, who's head of, his job title keeps changing, but I think he's head of digital engagement at the South Bank Centre. And he has this thing that he posted a couple of months ago talking about how they approach the way that they present digital art. And so they broke it down into art, broadcast, and community. So digital art is all about creating online-only art, stuff that doesn't exist without digital tools and things. Broadcast is about taking the stuff that they do, like a physical thing, like digital capture and all that kind of thing, and amplifying it so that people in Australia can experience it. And community is partly about strengthening the digital arts community and becoming sort of a trusted place as well. But it's also about there's a comms part to that as well. So that's pretty interesting. We chat about this occasionally. Fascinating to chat to this now. And this is the Space, the much loved Space, who have got someone in charge now who seems to know what they're doing and has, for their latest funding round, they've identified 3 strands to what they're doing. One is capture, extend, and landmark. Landmark is very much what James was talking about, the digital art part of it. Extend is the broadcast bit. Capture is the broadcast bit, taking the stuff that happens, filming it for the most part, and distributing it. And extend is about taking something existing and spinning a digital offering of it. Well, that's pretty good for their purposes and what they're doing. So here's my version. Drum roll. Okay. So I tend to break things down, my latest way of thinking about it, into core activities. So the purpose of what an organisation is about, like whether that's presenting art, creating art, educational advocacy, communications, distribution and operations. You may have noticed a slightly catch-all fudge for all the other stuff that underpins the system. So I'm going to go through these and just explain what I mean by some of this. And I will get round to explaining why this is relevant to the whole whether you put your money and ROI on digital spend. So we're going to start with communication. Hands up to people here who work in some sort of communication type role. I'm giving this So communication I would take as telling people about art, talking to people about the art, and giving the means for them to talk about the art themselves and discuss it with each other. I reckon that's it. So it's not just a broadcast model, so that was one of the things picked up from Jay. It's not just broadcast, but when he's talking about community, this is brilliant. I came across this a couple of years ago. It's all about audience involvement. I think it works quite well for comms. So this idea of this is your email blast and say buy a ticket for this thing. As you go through it, you're ceding ownership of the conversation, to go back to the social media part. So that's the kind of spectrum of types of conversation you might have around communications things. There's all sorts of different ways of approaching that. In terms of talking about communication, these are the kinds of things that you use in communication if you're doing it digitally, as opposed to non-digitally. None of those we can use on short. The thing about a lot of these is they bleed over between each other. This, I don't know if anyone came across this. I'm not showing off or anything. I was in Paris and Oliver Edison's contact was at the Louis Vuitton Foundation, and it was amazing. It doesn't show up behind, but he's the guy who put the sun in the turbine wall. To these installations, there's all the lights and craziness. And it was the kind of space that you walk into, nobody could resist taking a photo in that place and sharing it. And I just thought that was really, I've been to Christian Lacroix exhibition like a couple of hours before, very sort of safe. There was an app you could download which gave you directions around quite a small building. This was, like, in terms of communication, I thought this was really interesting because this was a show that marketed itself. They set the hashtag up. The marketing people there weren't trying to push messages out to people. They were sat there reacting to the flood of everything that was coming their way while people were talking about things themselves. It was fascinating to watch. I was about something on Instagram, obviously, and I got a comment from one of their marketing team saying, "Oh, could you see a hashtag on it? And it'll appear on our wall, on our website." And it's still there. And it just scrolls for miles, all the people who are doing this, but it's stuff pulled from their own networks. So, allowing people to talk about stuff when you're not the one putting the message out there. I think I'll start again. Quite the last impression, I think. The distribution side of things, I wrote an article about this, which I'm sure you all read, for the Arts Digital R&D Fund, so I'm not going to dwell on this too long. If you didn't read it, I'll give you a second. So this is basically about, there was a thing about how there are loads of ways of getting stuff out to people these days. You'll notice that there is quite a lot of crossover between the communications and the distribution side of things. You can now watch videos on Facebook. It is a distribution method as well as a communications method, which is interesting. There's a couple of really specific ones, like the anti-bias and the digital theatres. Rondo Live was not from Rondo Live. Rondo Live did the thing where they took their rehearsals and broadcast them online. Royal Opera House have done similar, various others have. It's quite an analog thing. The art bit of it is unchanged pretty much, but the distribution method is digital. Seeing as we're at Globe Player, it's a distribution platform that Shakespeare's Globe So that's the distribution side of things. Operations, I bet you will touch on this kind of stuff. It's the stuff that makes everything else operate. So E16s and CRMs and all that kind of stuff. So as opposed to having a ledger book. I know some organisations still have them, and that's how they book artists in that 4 months' time. And it literally is still written in pencil. Quite a big organisation does that. I have no idea. So yes, but things are, so we're talking about digitally transforming that side of things. That's the kind of stuff that's being done. So tickets sold online as opposed to hands over boxes. Revolutionary, that's transformational digitally in that area. And then we get on to the interesting one for me. I do most of my work in the kind of the communications and the operations bit. It tends to be my area. The core activities is the one I'm really interested in, but wouldn't claim to be no expert whatsoever. So this is the stuff the artists do and the educators do. How many people here work in education type roles? In the advocacy and all that stuff. So the core mission of an arts organisation, a lot of the people who I'm guessing are IT craftsmen have been existing for a while, and so they deliver their mission face-to-face, analogue, people in an auditorium, that kind of thing. Whereas the stuff that, so James at Southbank, for example, he's looking at how you do art purely online for an international audience, potentially. And so going back to Ron they are doing an initiative at the moment called Sprint, where they're taking creative technologists, they're bringing them into their studios, and they will be they're using technology to create pieces. Who knows what that's going to look like? Spoke to someone about this yesterday. Apparently the technologists have gone in, and their first reaction is, oh my god, dancers are incredible. And they haven't got past that stage yet. So hopefully once they've got past that stage, they'll start to bring their own stuff there. But this is, so that's an example. So this is a program run by Caper, one called Katie here, who are definitely worth checking out. They do things called happenstance, where they put technologists in galleries like Lighthouse in Brighton, Science Gallery in Sheffield, and a couple of others. And yeah, interesting. This one, hot off the press, this made it a slide deck this morning. Guggenheim have launched their first online exhibition. That's interesting. So they've they're looking at how you do that kind of thing. It's interesting contrast with, with the Tate, who talk about their website as being their fifth gallery. They take to that extent with the way they this is beautiful. It's called Unitt, Y-U-N-E. It's a visualization of an album of music that you can play with and alter the sound. It's taken an album, a set thing, and use digital tools to allow you to affect it and navigate through it. It's not a game, it's an experience. It's not quite an album listening thing, but it's different. This guy, Brendan Dawes, he's one of my new favourites. He's got a great email list so he creates some digital art stuff. He does things with he'll do fluffy objects, he'll do data visualizations, but he's got a mailing list which is worth signing up to because he talks about all the tools that he uses in his artistic projects. And so it's not just the art, but it's the way of creating it as well. I've got a soft spot for Stan's Cat from Birmingham-based theatre company. They do blogging really well. Most people don't. They do it really well. For my money. And they were talking about how they've shifted to using their lighting setup. They've done it manually for ages, and someone's come along and now they're using a laptop to do everything and setting everything in advance. And it's just a little post just musing on the effect that bringing digital tools into the creating and presenting process, how that affects the art itself. Which I think is interesting. So there's all that. So how do we do time? Okay. The thing I'm interested in this is that when people talk about digital activity in arts organisations, quite often the mind flips straight away to digital marketing. And that is only part of the thing. The reason I think that is if you take all these four bits, I think there's a big difference in the amount of support that's given to arts organisations for this stuff and the scope of change that can happen in the first place. And the imperative that's felt to make any kind of change. And I think communication there's been a bigger imperative to do stuff there. Mike and I just now were talking outside about the reducing print runs and spending on digital marketing instead, because it may well be a lot more effective, and there are other organisations that are doing this kind of thing. We're in a communications landscape where it is becoming much easier to send targeted, specific messages to very particular people, reaching them in the networks they're already using, and that is trackable in a way that a brochure or a billboard isn't. I'm not saying those things aren't required, but I think that is what has fueled the marketing owning the website in organisations. They're the ones that are spending the money on it. They're the ones that need it. For the other people, not quite such a big deal, so they make the money. Distribution, I think, is interesting because the Arts Council, Pete, bless him, seems to have a big point about distribution. So looking at Canvas. Who's come across Canvas, the YouTube thing? So that's a £1.8 million experiment on distribution via YouTube. There's been a lot of digital spend on distribution methods over the last little while. I think partly because, a bit like communication, you can kind of see the return on that. It's a solved problem. People have done live streaming, you can see what that's worth. So there's a feedback loop involved there that you can pay attention to. A bit like communications. Pay X amount for a huge email blast to go back and check to see how many tickets you sold. Feedback loops quite directly there to judge it. So there's quite a lot of support there. It's a bit of an own quantity. Operations, to some extent, there's certainly on the ticketing side, the CRM side, there seems to be very little support for this stuff out there. It's not the kind of thing that gets talked about at many conferences, for example. But there is some imperative there. So shifting your ticketing online, for example, having a CRM in place so that you can do your marketing better, all that kind of stuff. Sound accents that have moved everything to Google, all their docs and things, and reckon it saved them a ton of cash. The one that I missed is the core activities one, and I think this is trickier. I don't see there being so much support for this stuff. I think it's more of an unknown. If you start ploughing your budget into that kind of area, the returns are more uncertain. Giving money to artists is generally, just seems to me, to be one of the riskier things that you can do in an organisation. So that sprint thing, the wrong way, who knows what's going to come out of that? Whereas if we spend that money on a social media campaign, you've got an idea of what the return is going to be. So I think that puts that stuff in a slightly more difficult position. It's a shame. I also think, in terms of developing this stuff, there's real space for projects that overlap some of these. This is my new favourite thing. It's called Leon. Someone's made a choose your own adventure game on Twitter, and there are hundreds of Twitter accounts, and basically you click to different Twitter accounts, and each one has got one tweet on it. It asks you a question, says, do you choose A or B? It takes you through it. These are the most beautifully done little GIFs. It's all this kind of pixel art stuff. Must have taken ages to do. The interesting thing about this, for me, is this crosses quite a few of those in terms of digital art. This was created digitally, it's presented digitally, it's an online-only thing. You can print this out and work in quite the same way. It's distributed through the communications platform, so it ticks both of those things. So that's your distribution, the 1900 retweet. I think the scope for these kinds of projects is interesting. And I think there's potential in that kind of area. This is slight hand. I'm much less interested at the moment in projects that are about incremental growth or treading water. There's an organisation who are not in the room. Yes. They are very publicly blogging about their new website build. And yesterday they produced a design brief, and this is what success has been defined as for this project. Unique monthly visitors to the website at 10%. Some marketing KPI, not a website build KPI, fine. Maybe they're improving the SEO and so on. Online sales and donations increased, fine. The one that gets me, 5 to 20 mailing list sign-ups per month. Like, not being rude. Okay, being a bit rude. If that's what success looks like, what exactly does failure look like? That's awful. I get more than that per week for my mailing list, and I'm one person. I'm not, say they're a museum? No. I'm not a museum. Surely they're more interesting than I am. Anyway, so this, to me, spending money on these kinds of projects feels like treading water to me. The kind of return that you get, if that is your return, for all the effort and money and heartache and sleepless nights that are involved in doing that kind of thing, I just don't see the point. So, don't tell me to say that, please. Because I was shooting. So, I told you there were good slides for me. So this is another metaphor for you. This is so I'm kind of thinking there are a couple of choices. You can either train your camel, in this case, to run with the pack, and everyone's going to do exactly the same stuff, and everyone's going to be in a herd doing the same things. A bit like that kind of project. What I'm really interested in is, instead of just doing the same as everyone else and running with the pack, sticking a rocket on your camel is completely changing the game. There's a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. It's all about breaking into uncontested markets. like redefining what you're doing. I really don't know where I found that from. Don't ask me how I got down this route. But this is where, and I'm extending this, you see how it goes. What I think is if you're going to be spending money on digital projects, like we're all walking around with computers in our pockets that are millions of times more powerful than the thing that took a rocket to the moon. And we're all worried about what time of day we should be tweeting. Like, I kind of lose patience with a lot of the sort of content hacking, A/B testing, growthy kind of stuff, where a lot of energy is heads down, channeled into very small improvements to things. I know someone who A/B tested the word support in their navigation of their website, testing support, support us, give and join, and a couple of other things. And after a couple of weeks of leaving that test to run, they discovered no difference. They could have called it anything. Doesn't matter. Right, good, well done. So those kinds of, I do and don't believe this. I think there is value to some of that stuff, but I also think there's a lot of value to an organisation putting its effort into making step changes in the stuff they're doing. When you've got the internet and digital tools at your fingertips, doing stuff that can take advantage of that to the benefit of not just your organisation, but to serve the mission you're doing. So I found two, I bet there's more, ways to stick a rocket on your camera. That's not going to get taken up by is it? But I think artistic programming is one of the big things. So that Oliver Everton thing was an artistically led thing. It just happened to benefit their comms team. I think a lot of projects I work with, you've got you see a lot of marketing people who are trying to do their best with some bad programs sometimes and things that have been. I get a lot of people in this room don't have an influence over this particularly. But you always see, if you ever see a spike in someone's traffic on their website, it's never because of something that the marketing team has done. It's because something exciting has been programmed, and that's what sent traffic through. You can kind of, in terms of making nice websites and like what you see around stuff, to some extent you kind of greasing the pipes and helping people along it, and maybe there's some people who are kind of out on the fence and make it easy for them to do stuff, and that works. But if you've got people who really want to do something, and it doesn't have to be a massive Harry Potter-esque thing where people climb over each other's crushed bodies to get a ticket. It can be more nuanced than that. It doesn't have to be massive scale. So that would be an example of that kind of thing. The second one is, to extend my torturous method, hire a rocket scientist. By which I mean, this is the smuggiest blog post I've ever written, unapologetic about it. I wrote this back in 2012 because I had clocked a year before that the BFI had a job advert out for a head of digital business development. I love job adverts, it's my favourite thing, because you can see what an organisation is doing. If anyone hires a senior member of digital staff, you know something big is coming in like 12 months, 6 to 12 months time. So I was like, okay, so they're establishing a digital business development unit. That's interesting. And this all seeks to engage new online audiences, develop a new suite of digital packages, establish a network of digital media partners, and deliver revenues of $500,000 on costs of $200,000 in year 3 of the business plan. That's interesting. A year later, they announced BFI Player. In fact, they announced they were digitising 10,000 films by 2017, and BFI Player became was built to be a distribution platform for that. That step change kind of stuff. It's risky, it's big. That's the kind of, if you see people going in at that level, if an organisation, typically an organisation's first hire in digital stuff is a digital marketing assistant, and salaries differ, but it's junior roles. and that's necessary and fine, all the rest of it. But I don't think that leads to much in the grand scheme of things. I mean, this is the kind of thing that creates a big change in what organisations are doing. So, I've rambled a bit, I apologise for that. So taking it back to the original question of where do you put your money, there is no easy answer from what I've got, but I think I would be encouraged by the state of the sector if there was more emphasis put on transformational roles and projects rather than looking at the minutiae of the revenue management side of things in theatres or whatever. I'm not saying that stuff isn't valuable, but in terms of ROI, it's slightly riskier and there might be some big investment required, but I think that's where you really see a return on spend on digital activity. Thank you. I've got every reference on that. I will have a link available, which I'll tweet later, so keep an eye on that. Many links, and the slides will be available as well. So, question?